Now let's talk about subdermal color maps. In week 3 I provided a series of lecture notes that kind of go over the general breakdown of epidermal versus subdermal. Now this also depends on what studio you're at and what skin shader you're using. Most studios would just have 2 layers of subsurface. You'll have the epidermal color information and then the subdermal color information. Sometimes you'll have shaders that actually allow you a 3rd slot. So you can have the epidermal, the dermal, and the subdermal. Again, it depends where you're working, but for our purposes and what I just want to go over is the basics of epidermal and subdermal. So we already talked about the epidermal skin, and that's basically the dead layer of skin that sits on top of everything. So looking at an actual photograph, like this face, this obviously has, from a physiological standpoint, it actually has all 3 layers built in. It has the epidermal, the dermal, and subdermal. Well, we're just going to split it out into 2. So the first, and this is going to be very, very crude to give you an idea, just to reiterate things. The first is the dead layer of skin. So basically it's going to look something like this on human skin. And keep in mind this is traditional human skin. So it's a skin that's already dead and it's going to flake off. I think we shed our skin every 45 days or something like that. So from here we also have a subdermal layer. And this is all the fatty tissue, the subcutaneous details, and the blood that's underneath the skin that gives the overall look of warmth. And this layer looks something like this. Again, it really depends on what skin you're going for. Caucasian skin reacts very differently than, say, African American skin. And obviously we have a lot of specularity and stuff going on here. We're just kind of interrupting, but to give you an idea. So this is what the epidermal and the subdermal generally look like for human skin in terms of coloration. Obviously a lot of these details we don't want to have in the subdermal, but some of them we do. So when you're approaching your skin, really think about, from a physiological standpoint, how this is all broken up. Because then we can decide and make artistic decisions and informed decisions on what details we want to keep in the epidermal that makes sense to keep it there, and what details we want to keep in subdermal. And furthermore, what details we want to have in both. Just in terms of intensity and which ones we want to bump up the intensity of the details and which ones we want to tone down. So it's a balancing act. So if we go back to this character here, this is a different case. Because his skin is so dark, I still want the warmth, but I don't want it to be too warm because, again, he is an underground dwelling creature. So his skin, for the most part, is going to be very quote-unquote pale. And I know he's not pale in the sense that his skin's very dark, but I don't want to have a ton of blood flow in his skin. I don't want to make his face look flushed. I don't want to make him look like he's had sun exposure. So what I end up doing here is I'm going to grab all this stuff here and I'm going to group it. And call this epidermal color. And then I'm going to, instead of copying pasting this entire thing, I'm going to cache this layer because I'm done with my epidermal color. And then I'm just going to add adjustment layers on top of this. That way I keep things relatively frugal in terms of my disk cache, and I don't have to copy all these layers and worry about caching all that other stuff. Because I'm not going to be doing any major texture changes at this point. But that may change later. So for now, let's take a look at this. So for now, I'm just going to go in and use levels. And to be quite frank, I did a lot of trial and error when I was painting the subdermal maps to get exactly what I wanted in terms of the final overall look. And actually, let me bring that up if I can. So there we go. So this for this tone here, to get this kind of overall look that I got in my final render, I actually ended up going darker with his skin. Somewhere in that realm. And that ended up rendering really nicely for me when I was doing my look dev in Arnold. And I didn't really need to do much. Now what I can do is grab my vein small. I'm going to copy and paste this. Because what I want to do is I want to actually have these veins show up even stronger in my subdermal. So I'm going to turn this full value and darken it even more. So let's try 2.2. And that way this is still non-destructive, but I'm getting this to read much deeper in my subdermal because this is where the veins actually live. So we're going to get that to read a lot better in the final render. Especially when we get backscattering in the ears, you're really going to read these veins really nicely. And because I kept it as a separate layer, it's all non-destructive and very easy to update. I'm just going to label this stuff so I know for future what these different layers are doing. And that's pretty much it for this guy. Because these tonal values actually played really well when I rendered him. But again, a lot of this stuff ends up being trial and error, even in production, you know, because there's always a different look that people are trying to go for. And sometimes you just have to do a couple trial and errors, especially with how certain skin shader models are set up. You really got to get a feel for how each layer of skin is being calculated in the renderer and in the shader. But based on my trial and error, I was able to get maps that kind of look something like this, where this is the subdermal, and then the epidermal read something like this. So it's a bit more washed out, a bit lighter, kind of the dead skin tone. Because his skin is supposed to be quote-unquote black, this is actually based off of black, pretty pale. So it makes sense that it's this tonality versus the final look of his skin, which ends up becoming pretty dark. So again, when you guys are doing yours, take a look at your skin reference and start getting an idea of how you want to break up your subdermal maps and how you want to paint those. Now we can go even further depending on the type of skin, where I would get even more blotchiness. If it is human skin, getting even more tonality. So redder in the nose, even redder in the ears and the lips and the eyes. But we'll take this on a case-by-case basis with each of you, depending on what kind of design and artwork and photograph you decide to pull from week one. And we can talk about more of that. But again, most of that stuff, if you decide to go even more color variation and adding more reds and more hot spots, so in the skin you're getting pinkier on the eyes or on the ears, the lips. Again, it's all masking and layers. So it's nothing new, it's nothing different that I've shown in prior videos. So feel free to explore with those techniques, explore getting more color variation. Through masking and layers. There's not really much else I do in this program, especially in 2.0. I really rely on the masks and the adjustment layers and the adjustment filters and the layers, and just treat it like Photoshop. So I think for most of you who have used Photoshop in the past, this is going to be a very easy transition and very fluid in terms of how you want to build stuff up. But be sure to take advantage of the caching when you can, because that's going to speed up your workflow considerably when you're painting. And especially if you're like me, you just kind of add layers upon layers without thinking because you just want to keep things non-destructive. Caching is going to be your best friend in the end. And so now it's much more snappy. And if you're on one monitor like myself here, be sure to hide with the home button, the home hotkey, hide your palettes. That's actually going to speed up process as well when you're painting. I always hide my palettes when I'm doing major painting because that really speeds stuff up. So there we go. So I'm going to end this recording and we're going to move on to some more stuff for this week.